Thanks, Brian. And again, on behalf of the Association of the United States Army, welcome. Typically in an event like this, you note all the individual dignitaries who are here. We'd be here for about an hour and a half if we did this. So instead of acknowledging each individual, if you'll allow me to fall back on a great African tradition that I learned while serving at United States Africa Command, where the Africans, when confronted with a group full of dignitaries, say simply, all protocol observed. So if we'll allow that, then that will allow us to move on. You find yourself this morning in the General Gordon R. Sullivan Conference and Events Center. That's an important connection. General Sullivan, of course, the 32nd Chief of Staff of the United States Army, longtime President and Chief Executive Officer here at the Association of the United States Army. But it is important to note that during his tenure as Chief of Staff of the Army is when the Peacekeeping Institute was stood up. He believed so very strongly in this mission as Chief of Staff that he founded the organization. In fact, I remember my first encounter with General Sullivan when he was Chief of Staff. I was a battalion commander detached on UN duty in Macedonia. More properly at that time, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. We'll see how that all plays out eventually. But General Sullivan came to see his soldiers on a peacekeeping mission. And I like to think that maybe part of his experience there and his exposure to that mission is what caused him to think that this important role for the United States Army should be codified and institutionalized, to have a group of folks who wake up every morning at the Army War College who think about what are the things that the Army needs to be thinking about in order to improve its capacity and its capability to perform peacekeeping and peacemaking operations around the globe. I'll make one brief exception to my introductory comments and note the arrival of the former Secretary of the Army, John McHugh. Mr. Secretary, welcome. We're glad that you're here. So again, as Brian said, we are very, very happy to again co-host this event, to welcome you to the Association of the United States Army. We hope you'll find this to be a productive day. The agenda, I think, is set up is spectacular with a number of great panelists and speakers. If there's anything that any of us at the association can do for you, Greg Sprouse in the back is our audiovisual and conference coordinator extraordinaire. So please don't hesitate to ask Greg or any of the Association of the United States Army folks, those out in the lobby, for any assistance that you may need throughout the day. And we look forward to a tremendous day with you here. Thank you very, very much for choosing to spend your Monday here. I think what's going to turn out to be a rainy Monday with the remnants of Florence as she starts to come in here a little bit later this morning. But we are very, very happy that you are here. And Brian, if it's okay now, I would introduce the Commandant of the United States Army War College, Major General John Kemp.
Thanks, sir, Mr. Secretary. Illustrious group. A great, amazing agenda today. And I just want to make a few comments. I'll probably take about 5 minutes. But as part of the Army War College, the PKSOI is an important part of that. And we're proud to be part of this event. This is about since 2014, AUSA has been hosting this. And I really can't thank AUSA enough, sir, for doing this. If you go back and look at all the previous agendas, this one, I would argue, is probably the most powerful in terms of the collection of people coming together to do it. That also reflects the power of the United States, NATO, and the partnerships we bring together to do something like this. And I think that's part of the draw of being here. And I know, talking to the team, how proud they are of the previous one. Sometimes you come to these events, you see a lot of people, you talk a lot, you do build connections, but afterwards you wonder, well, what did it then lead to? And I would argue, if you go look at the notes from the last couple of years, that the stabilization review between DOD, Department of State, USAID, really, in many ways, some of the key themes and the critical parts of that came from the AUSA session with PKSOI a couple years ago. So that policy collaboration world, which is so complicated, it's actually the hard part, right? The walking out the gate, solving problems in combat, solving problems in peacekeeping is important. You got to make sure people are prepared. But the really ugly part is really sometimes the collaboration, trying to figure out what are we trying to do and why. and do we have the ends, ways, and means to do it? So I think that's why these kind of things are so important. PKSOI is celebrating its 25th year. It's an important partnership for the Army over the past 25 years. General Ham commented a little bit about General Sullivan. If you ask General Sullivan about it, I think he would reflect on his visit to Macedonia. Some of it was his takeaways from in the 80s, watching before Panama, both before and after military operations there, seeing some of the gaps and challenges of what did or didn't happen. And then when things go bad, it ends up being a combat operation. And so that was one of the reasons that drove it. And then while he was Chief of Staff, the actions in Somalia and the challenges and things like that all drove making sure that we need a place that thinks about it day in and day out and partners. And so for us, it's been a unique capability for 25 years, and we're very proud of it at the War College. The second part of that is, and probably the most important part, is the role of strengthening alliances, strengthening partnerships. You see that in the National Defense Strategy. You can see it in every National Defense Strategy for slightly different words, but if you look pretty far back, there's always about working better with partners. And PKSOI, AUSA have all done that. At the War College, we're proud of being able to contribute to that. We were talking beforehand about one or two of the officers here that went to the Army War College in the past. We used to have 40 international officers a year there. Back in 2013, it was doubled to 80. So every year, 80 families and international officers coming up to Carlisle and are embedded into in the student body, in the culture and all those things. And then the connection with PKSOI, because many of them either did it or are going to be doing that in their own countries. And I'm happy to say, and we didn't plan this, so this might not work out well, but we have 5 students we brought down today to spend the day with us. We didn't plan it, but I'd ask them if they could stand up, say where you're from and what you did in your last job, if you don't mind. Go ahead. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Thanks.
Colonel Gennady from Ukraine, Chief of Staff, Gennady Brigade.
Colonel Mazen Farlai from Jordan, I was the Chief of Operations at the Jordan Operations.
Thanks, appreciate it. So, so part of this was for them to see how we do these kind of things. Secondly, they get to go back and maybe write a paper about it. We'll make it hard on them. But also just to see how we collectively, NATO, United States, others, work as partners to try to advance what we're doing. So it's going to be a great day. The last thing I would tell you is you can go back to the founding of the Army War College. It started over here at Fort McNair back in the early 1900s by Elihu Root, who was the Secretary of War for Teddy Roosevelt. And President Roosevelt, and the motto that he said and his purpose at the groundbreaking was not to promote war but to preserve peace. So I can't think of anything more important than talking about stabilization and peacekeeping, stability operations, partnership, building partner capacity, security cooperation. Those are important things, and NATO is a huge role around the world in making that happen. So let's get started with the day. Thanks.
All right. Of course, with technicalities, we'll go ahead. Greg, are we good with NATO? Wow. So, wow, that worked better than I thought it would. At this time, it is my pleasure, absolute pleasure, to introduce this year's keynote speaker, the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Rose Gottemoeller. Did I pronounce that right, ma'am?
You did, Colonel, and I thank you very much indeed. Are you all hearing me all right?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. You said high technology. Well, what I did was whip off the yellow sticky that was over the camera on my little iPad here. So that was truly high technology. But it's wonderful to be with you today. You know, the U.S. Army War College is a very special place for me, as I served on your board of visitors about 15 years ago. And at that point, PKSOI was in its first decade, but it was already making an impact. So now I've landed at NATO as the Deputy Secretary General, but I want to tell you how proud I am of the professional association I've had with the U.S. Army War College and been able to watch the PKSOI develop from strength to strength over the years. So it's a great honor for me to speak with you today. I'm very, very sorry that I can't be with you in person, but our Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, James Apatrai, is there with you today. I see him there in the front row and look forward to hearing how the discussion goes later on. He'll be able to answer any questions that I can't answer because I won't be able to stay with you for a Q&A period, but James will be there to represent us. So I was asked to speak to the theme of this conference, which is about projecting stability. I would like to speak with you about how NATO works with its neighbors to increase security within their own borders. That is, about how NATO projects stability. NATO was established almost 70 years ago for a very specific purpose, to safeguard the freedom and security of our members. So when we first began, we were focused on how to deter the Soviet Union and how to prevent World War III. Looking back, I think we did pretty well. While the Cold War was a period of immense potential danger, it was in many ways a period of unprecedented stability, at least within Europe. When the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed, there were genuine concerns as to what the future would hold. The threat of nuclear Armageddon may have diminished, but the threat of instability as the Soviet Empire collapsed was very real. The brutal wars that we saw in the Balkans in the 1990s were a stark reminder of the relative fragility of the New World Order. And while these conflicts in the Balkans are part of a very important story about NATO's transformation after the Cold War, I'd like to focus on another area of work that we embarked on in the 1990s. We didn't use the term projecting stability back then, but one of the first and perhaps the most significant acts of projecting stability by NATO was to enter into a series of partnerships with countries in Europe and Eurasia, several of which had been members of the Warsaw Pact or indeed republics of the Soviet Union. The Partnership for Peace program offered tailored practical cooperation to those countries who were interested and trying to build a better future. It gave those countries some of the tools that they would need to enhance stability and security, which might otherwise not have been available to them. And for those interested, it also helped to open the door to NATO membership. Through this kind of cooperation, we have built relationships and undertaken projects that have enhanced security and stability for all. From defense reform to civil emergency planning to educational programs and training for scientific cooperation. These efforts have borne fruit for decades and continue to serve us well today. Yet, as we entered the 21st century, though the threat of instability declined in Central and Eastern Europe, it significantly increased in the world at large. The attacks on the United States on 9/11 marked a sober start of a new era for NATO. And I will just note that we commemorated that sad day this last week at the NATO headquarters in front of our monument to the memory of those who perished in 9/11. That is a memorial that is really a piece of the Twin Towers sitting out front of our new headquarters here in Brussels. In addition to our Article 5 operation that set out to monitor the Mediterranean for weapons of mass destruction, we also undertook our largest ever out-of-area mission in Afghanistan, working to bring stability to a war-torn nation and to prevent it from again becoming a safe haven for international terrorism. More recently, we have seen violence and turmoil in parts of North Africa and the Middle East. Turmoil that has contributed to the spread of terrorism locally and within our own countries, as well as a humanitarian crisis, that has led many to flee their homes in search of safety abroad. Russia's increasingly aggressive actions have also increased instability. The illegal annexation of Crimea, efforts to destabilize eastern Ukraine, and myriad attempts to sow disunity and confusion are just a few examples. So, instability is a challenge to security. And we have learned through experience that we can enhance security by working with willing partners to improve their stability and resilience. This is why projecting stability is now a central part of NATO's core business. This set of activities and initiatives covers a wide range of topics in a diverse set of countries, and I'll just run through a few examples for you. One of our highest profile initiatives is defense and related security capacity building, what we call DCB. This is commonly known outside of NATO as security sector reform. NATO has extensive experience and expertise in advising, assisting, training, and mentoring countries that ask for our support. In the Middle East and North Africa, this often means training local militaries to better protect their own borders, their own lands, and their own people. In the East, it often means helping nations to withstand the threat of hybrid warfare tactics employed by Russia. And at all times, it means helping our partners to strengthen their institutions to become more resilient, more democratic, and less prone to corruption. The initiative has been launched in Georgia, Moldova, Jordan, and Iraq. Last year, Libya made a request for support, and at the Brussels summit just this past summer, leaders approved a DCB package for Tunisia. We also have NATO's Defense Education Enhancement Program, or DEEP, which helps partners to professionalize their armed forces. Last year, more than 2,000 people from our partner countries took part in the educational events offered through this program. I mentioned hybrid attacks. Using ambiguity and a variety of methods to create or exploit any potential weakness to limit a government's ability to make decisions in a crisis. These are hybrid tactics that all of us are seeing every day in one form or another. And I'm hearing from partners and allies across the world that they are experiencing these kinds of tactics. So as well as building up and improving the quality of our partners' militaries, projecting stability is also about helping them build strong and effective institutions that will help them to resist hybrid attacks. Corruption and poor governance complicate every security challenge we face as the NATO alliance. They undermine democracy and the rule of law, and they erode public trust. They run counter to a stable, resilient system. NATO's Building Integrity program helps nations to take action and promote good practices to combat corruption. Each of these specific programs has shown important results, and NATO is working to ensure that our efforts are coherent. For example, at our summit in Brussels, again this past July, leaders endorsed a package on the South to give NATO a more strategic, coherent approach to the Middle East and to North Africa as well. The package aims to strengthen NATO's deterrence and defense against threats coming from the South, to contribute to international crisis management efforts in the region, and to help our partners in the region to build resilience against security threats, including in the fight against terrorism. We have established a hub for the South in Naples to help better understand the realities of the region and to better tailor NATO assistance to our partners across the region of the Mediterranean, but also into the Gulf region. We have also launched a non-combat training and capacity building mission in Iraq. This mission is just coming together again, launched out of a decision that was taken at the July summit. It was made at Baghdad's request to help stabilize the country and to fight terrorism. Building upon our already existing DCB package for Iraq, NATO will help Iraq develop its national security structures and its military education institutions from top to bottom. So, as I've outlined, NATO does a great deal to project stability. However, I want to make clear that we cannot and should not try to do everything alone. We don't have all the right tools. That's why one of the reasons why I very much welcome our opportunity to work with you today at this conference, and I hope it will seed some opportunities for cooperation in the future. But I also wanted to close by talking a little bit about our cooperation with the European Union. We have been working together with the European Union for some time, but since the Warsaw Summit in 2016, those efforts have really been boosted. And again, at our summit in July, we signed, or on the margins of it, we signed yet another joint statement with Presidents Juncker and Tusk. Secretary General Stoltenberg did this to, again, give a push of intensification in our cooperation. The reason it is so important is that NATO and the EU are a powerful force for good together. They can tackle together insecurity and terrorism, as well as some of the underlying causes, such as poverty and lack of education. Again, NATO can't do it all. We have one set of tools on the defense and security side. EU has another set of tools that ranges across the arena of economic development. And together, I always say, we have a powerful toolkit. That's why it's so important for us to work together and to work together with other relevant organizations around the world. In working with our partners to build their capacities and enhance resilience, and in coordinating our efforts with the EU and other institutions who are also contributing to these efforts, NATO projects stability and enhances its own security. This is very important work. We set out on this path over 20 years ago and have adapted our approach along the way. As you continue the conversation over the next day and a half at this conference, and as I said, I hope as we take it beyond this conference, I urge you to consider how this essential work can be further improved, what we can do together to ensure greater security and stability for all. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you this morning. I really do appreciate the honor, and I wish you every success with the conference. I wish I could be there with you because I remember how beautiful it is in Carlisle at this time of year. So, I heard you had a rainy day. Well, anyway, nevertheless, I hope it's a good, enjoyable, and also very productive conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Really appreciate your thoughtful comments. Those really set the conditions for our panels that remain for the day. We'll expand that dialogue through the Deputy Assistant Secretary on the State Center panel, and hopefully further some work that will come off of this for projecting stability. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate the opportunity once again. I'm going to return my sticky to the camera here, so I'll take myself offline. But again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks again, ma'am.